Whenever I make an episode of our plant stories, I record wild track. Ask any radio producer, you only forget to do this once, because every place you record has a different sound, and if you and your guest sit in silence for a minute, then that recording of sound will mask any edits I make when I put together an episode. As Jess and I sat in silence on a bench in the Museum of Homelessness garden, Jess was checking her bird app, so listen out for a wren and a great tit. The museum's new exhibition, Criminal, An Untold History of Homelessness, Resistance and Survival, runs for 10 weeks from the 21st of May to the 25th of July and is free to visit, so do check out their website for more details. And if you want all new episodes of the podcast in your inbox on the day I publish them, then go to ourplantstories.com and sign up for the newsletter. Welcome to Our Plant Stories. I have been volunteering in a garden for a couple of years now, just one day a week. And today's story has come from that garden, which belongs to the Museum of Homelessness in Finsbury Park in North London.
The Buddleja goes into the cracks in the city and it can exist where no one else can. So it feels like, that's why it feels like a spirit plant to me. I think it represents our community so well. It's a survivor plant, but not only that, it's not only a survivor that can live anywhere, it's also brilliant for butterflies, and it has beauty and it has gifts to give. And that also makes me think of people who are homeless and people who are pushed to the edges. The community has so much to give, but it's not always understood.
That's Jess Turtle, co-founder and director of the museum. Founded in 2015, it is created and run by people with direct experience of homelessness. It's a special museum because, as well as telling the history of homelessness through its collections and exhibitions, it does crucial independent research and campaigning, and it's practical. One of the first things that struck me when I went there was that, yes, there is a cold tap in the garden, but there is also a hot tap, because that is what the community said they needed when the museum moved to its present site in 2023. Now, we can hear the sounds of traffic. We'll probably hear the sounds of the odd siren. There's a very large truck going by us at the moment. But tell me where we're sitting.
We're sitting in Museum of Homelessness Garden. We're sitting on a bench at the north end of our pond. The bench was built by Taffy, one of the community members, and the pond was dug by many of us over many painful weeks. And just to our south, which people can probably hear clearly, is the Seven Sisters Road and Green Lanes, and the intersections of both those huge London roads. But somehow this space manages to feel like almost bucolic, even just next to these huge roads and all of this hustle and bustle of this part of Finsbury Park.
Tell me what this garden means to you.
This garden is so special to me. It's the garden around the museum. The museum is a parkkeeper's lodge that was built in the 1860s when Finsbury Park was opened. A two-storey red brick building, and the garden around it is much bigger than the footprint of the building. And when we were looking for a site for Museum of Homelessness, this was the one that the community loved the most, and everyone just really wanted this to be the museum's home. And I think the garden's got so much to do with that, because it is such a big outdoor space, and when we came across it, it was really, really wild, and hadn't really been looked after for a good number of years. COVID had happened and the pandemic and everything, but I think before that it hadn't been loved for a while. And we've kind of built everything, almost everything, with our own hands. The community have designed it, designed different zones in it, dug out the paths by hand, dug the pond, and it really means so much to me, because it's such a site of community connection, people being creative, and people also just being able to sit for a while and not, just like we're doing this morning, just to sit. There's not many places left in cities where you can just sit peacefully, and this is one of them.
So tell me about your plant story, your chosen plant.
My chosen plant is the Buddleja, and it relates to quite formative memories of the Docklands in Cardiff in the 80s. Before it was developed, I grew up in a community of homeless people set up by my parents, and that's now the biggest homelessness charity in Wales. But in those days, in the 70s and 80s, when me and my brother were born there, it was very different, very grassroots, very much people with experience of homelessness setting something up, like for the community, with the community. So it was a really special place. Not to over-romanticise it, that wasn't an easy childhood in lots of ways, but also it had many gifts to it. And I think that's true of a lot of community settings. So we had a main house and then several satellite houses, and then when the rules in the main house were for people did need to be sober to access it and to live there, and people weren't able to be violent, and very simple, like no drink, no drugs, no violence, simple rules, but essential for keeping everyone safe. And actually the same basic ground rules that we have here on this site. And so when people did maybe fall off the wagon or have a bad week, the community didn't want people to have to go back to the streets. So we set up a night shelter in Cardiff docks, in porta cabins, gravel, very rough, but that's where people could stay, so they at least weren't out. So the night shelter was there, Cardiff docks, very different sort of site to the main house. But and then when my parents broke up, we went to live with my dad, and he was living in the night shelter in the early part after their breakup. So me and my brother lived there for a while, and all around this site, because the docks were undeveloped, was Buddleja. And I remember one summer, the warmth of the docks, the sunshine, the kind of turmoil that we were going through as a family, but I found it quite grounding, this plant. And the smell of it, you could smell the Buddleja so strongly, and it was prolific in these undeveloped docklands, and it would mingle with the hops from Brain's Brewery, and I'll never forget it, and it felt like, in some ways it felt like safety, or being able to find that little bit of footing in the world. It felt like that, because there was a place where people could be, even when they couldn't be anywhere else, and the Buddleja does that as well. So I think there's loads about the Buddleja that I can relate to, but it started there in the docks in that like warm end of summer times.
How old were you?
I think I was like 4 or 5, so it's really young, But ever since then, I've always noticed Buddlejas everywhere that I go, and well, I don't know, Sally, you'll be researching them for this episode, but it seems to me like they're an urban plant. Like, I don't remember really seeing them in the countryside, or it mainly seems to be like railway sidings. They literally lodge into the cracks of red brick, don't they? That's why I see them a lot in London. And the railway arches, the sidings, places where nothing else can live.
In the docks, where were they growing there?
They were just all around. So it was like the mid-80s. The docks had stopped working properly, but it was pre-regeneration. And if you go to Cardiff docks now, when I go, it feels weird because it's so unrecognisable. So they were literally just everywhere, so it would almost be like fields of them.
Were there gardens where you lived? Because you were very keen to create this garden. Is that because you just had grown up with any sort of garden around the places that you lived?
Yeah, I think there's another side to it. So there's the wildness of the Buddleja, and that experience of like living with our dad in that setting, which is probably experience not a lot of children have, but And the other side of it is my mum. She's really good with plants. You know, she's got a lot of wisdom, and we had a garden in the main house of the community. And I remember the residents built me, I would have been like 2 or 3, they built me a well, and that became a big community project. And you've seen how the community do those sort of projects here, and it's exactly the same energy, all the generations, you know, people are the same, and it's beautiful. So there was that, we had chickens there, and the garden was well loved. So I think gardening is such an important part of making a home for people, even, you know, whether it's individual homes or collective homes.
Was it that experience of growing up that led you to do this work?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I did actually try and, Sally, I tried to avoid it for many years. So I went for like more mainstream jobs in the arts, and really tried to leave all of that behind. And I had a good few years, but quite successful in more sort of usual arts jobs. But in the end, I think we can't really ignore our heritage, and if we are meant to do something, we'll do it. So yeah, so I suppose in my 30s I started feeling like something was missing in my life, and I wanted a different sort of purpose, and eventually Museum of Homelessness came out of that. And it definitely feels like now it's the jigsaw piece in my life that was missing. And being here and being in this garden with the community, and in a few hours everyone's going to arrive, aren't they? And it's just absolutely, the energy is very, very beautiful, and it's exactly the energy I grew up in. And when my mum comes to visit, she says it's exactly what it was. And there aren't that many places, because many places now are over professionalised, or they've developed into huge charities, and it's very the relationships in homelessness services are very, very different to community organising of homelessness with lived experience leadership, and that's the difference. And I think when a lot of people come here, they feel it in their heart, and they think that, so, you know, that there's a different way of doing things. So we're happy about that as well, that hopefully it can make some wider change, because we do need to bring back the compassion, the humanity, trusting people, respecting people, celebrating people's creativity and skills.
When I was researching Buddleja, I have to say an awful lot of the articles were about how much it's costing us to get rid of it.
Oh, were they? Oh, that's brilliant.
And how to get rid of it, and what an invasive plant it is. And I did think this is not what I'm looking for.
Wow.
But
there's parallels there, isn't there, with homeless people as well, again. Like, at the moment we're developing our next exhibition, and we're exploring the criminalisation of homelessness. So this idea of moving people on has been with us. Well, we've pinpointed to where it started, actually. We found some of the earliest records of people being transported for being homeless was in the early 1600s to mid 1600s with the Virginia Company, who, partly because of the enclosures, so land had been enclosed and people were made homeless through that for the first time. It's the first time we saw mass urban homelessness in that way. And the Virginia Company was one such company that went to the Mayor of London and the alderman at the time and said, we've got a solution for you, we'll take them. We will take them to build the plantations in Virginia. And so we found records that 100 children were transported, which is just awful to think about. And so many people were moved. Shortly after that, they began enclosing Ireland, Cromwell's campaign to do that, and Irish people were shipped out there, and then enslaved Africans were shipped there. So it seems that these processes of reshaping the natural world, which the enclosures were a significant one, cause homelessness, and then people are moved on and punished and criminalised for being homeless. And I think that relationship to land, the commons, having access to land, and homelessness is one that we've only really properly begun to explore this year in Museum of Homelessness, but it's such a critical one that we can all learn from. So I find it interesting that some plants are looked upon as pests and nuisances and blighting the urban landscape, as are some people in society. And when you say that, it makes me feel more of a connection with the Buddleja than I did before, I suppose, because it seems like it might have some of the similar challenges that we're having in the community. When we've been developing the exhibition, I think one of the most powerful things about this garden is that it's in the middle of Finsbury Park, but it's 24-hour accessible, so it's got a low fence. And all the other sites in Finsbury Park, the cafes and the different art organisations and stuff, have high fences around their site, and we didn't want to put one in. We wanted it to be 24-hour accessible. We've got taps that are available for people as well, 24 hours. And this has been really effective for people feeling like it's theirs, and also then protecting it. So we don't have thefts from the garden because the community love the garden and they protect it. So rather than having to use security, we've used community and compassion and connection and commons, because when we think about it, researching the commons, the idea of the commons, I realised that's what we've done with the garden. We've tried to democratise it, make it available and make it land that people can access anytime. And that is actually almost like a recommoning without knowing about it and without really reading the theory until after we'd done it. But it makes loads of sense. And for us, Museum of Homelessness, really when you think about it, if mass homelessness was caused by the land being enclosed, the fact that we've reopened some land is the only way to have a garden. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about this place and why people have such a deep connection to it.
As often happens when I'm working on these episodes, looking for someone who can be part of the conversation, the right person suddenly comes along. And this time it was the botanist Trevor Dines, who last year published a book called Urban Plants. It's fascinating, and I'll put the links to it on the website. Reading it, Trevor draws us into what he describes as the thrill of urban botany. You never quite know what you're going to find. And I was very happy when I found there were a lot of page references to Buddleja in the index. I wanted to begin by talking about the scent, which seemed to be such a strong trigger in Jess's memory.
I'm obsessed, literally obsessed with plant fragrances. And one of the first that I remember in the garden, I'm going back to the 1980s, I was sort of 10 or 11 years old. We had a huge Buddleja bush in the corner of the garden, and just that scent to me is summer. It is the scent of the garden, it's the scent of my childhood, and it's the scent of watching butterflies as well. All these butterflies that flock into the Buddleja flowers, and it's really floral scents are fascinating because there's so many components to them. You just think, oh, it's a scent, but it's not. It's a really complex thing. And there's a huge array of different sort of chemical compounds that go into making up these scents. Buddleja's got one of the more complicated ones, and they've unpacked and analysed the scent profile, as we call it, to understand what they are. There's all sorts of different chemicals in there. I mean, they've got some extraordinary name, 4-oxyphorone, which I probably pronounced wrong. That gives it a honey, tea and woody sort of smoky smell to it. There's another one, benzaldehyde, which smells of bitter almonds and cherry. So there's about 20 or 30 of these compounds that build up this really complex scent. And of course that's what pulls in the pollinators. That's what attracts them into the flowers, wafting on the breeze. The farther the scent can go, the more pollinators the plant will pull in.
That's so interesting that you talked a lot about it, Jess. For you, it's slightly mixed, wasn't it, with another smell from the brewery?
For me, it's always in my memory. The scent memory is a mix of Buddleja and hops from Brains Brewery, because down in the Cardiff Docklands at that time, in the 1980s as well, you would have that two very distinctive smells, but for me they'll always be combined.
That's amazing. I love that idea. The two scents together, a beer and a Buddleja, and good old brains. I know
exactly.
It well.
Just talked about coming across it in the Cardiff docks. Is there any significance to finding it there?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the first places that Buddleja was found in the wild. So it's a really important place in the story of Buddleja arriving in Britain. It came over from China many years ago in a chap called Pierre Armand David. He was a missionary over in China in the sort of 1860s, early 1870s. And he travelled around China. He was a missionary, but he was really compassionate with the communities that he was getting involved with and finding and having contact with. And he was the first person to discover Buddleja. In fact, it's 130 years ago this year that the first seeds were sent to Kew. So they arrived in Kew, and then people started growing them, started spreading around horticulturally this wonderful new plant, and then they started getting out into the wild. These, all of our garden plants, they don't like a garden wall, they don't like a fence, they like to hop over that and escape. So they quickly got out, and it was in fact in the 1920s. In fact, the first record was 1922 from Merionethshire in Harlech, but we don't know the habitat that was found in. But in 1924, the first records came from Cardiff, and they were in Cardiff docks.
That is incredible. That's incredible.
And so it's still there, and it's still, so for me, that's a real link with the tenacity of this plant and its ability to thrive and survive all those years in that same place, and it's still there. So Jess, you were coming into contact and enjoying some of those very first plants that escaped from the wild, and it's still growing around the docks.
That really means a lot to hear. Just to think, from 1924, I would have been there probably in the summer of 1984, having that first contact with a Buddleja as a 4-year-old little girl in the docks. It's just incredible to think about.
It's a lovely little connection, and I think this is what I love about plants is that it's never just about the plants. It's about the stories, and those stories are often deeply personal.
I'm quite interested in thinking about how plants survive in, so with the Buddleja landing in Cardiff Bay at that time, would it have come out from a garden, or would it maybe have come in, do the seeds come in from people who are stepping off ships, literally into the docks, or what happens with that in those sort of marginal areas of cities?
The Buddleja almost certainly came out of a garden at that time because it was being grown in our gardens at that time and became really, really popular very, very quickly. But Cardiff Docks is a place, even today, new plants are arriving through our docks, and we find new things coming in. Somebody's just found something down in Southampton docks. They don't know what it is. And I love the idea of, the resilience of people arriving, what they must have faced in those times, what they faced as a new culture, a new land, a new life, a new opportunity for them, and how they settled in our towns and cities and formed communities. Exactly the same happened with our plants. New plants arrived, they formed communities with native plants that existed here already, and with other new plants that are arriving, and form these new communities of plants, which are often really resilient in the face of urban pressures and building and change and all of those things that we're familiar with. And we call them recombinant ecology. They're new, unique combinations of plants that are able to thrive and survive. I love it. I just love this sort of thing because it's sort of like it's almost, I like to think of them almost as prophets of the future. This is what are our communities going to look like in the future? They are very much around new opportunities, new people coming together, new ideas, new thoughts, new ways of living together, and plants are doing exactly the same. So wow. Buddleja has been our companion for a long, long time in this journey.
Wow, recombinant communities, is that what it's called?
Yeah, the urban communities that they reflect is just lovely.
It's in some of the historical research we're doing in the museum's work at the moment. We're looking at historical accounts of people self-liberating from slavery, coming into Wapping docks, for example, self-liberating from slavery on English soil, and then being sheltered and nurtured by Irish and Jewish working class communities in the East End. So when you describe the recombinant communities of plants, it really makes me think about that, you know, the care that can be afforded in new communities, but also the sort of strength and the toughness of those people or plants that are finding new ways together.
For me, these urban environments are like crucibles of creation. You know, and the parallels with plants are just amazing. What you've just described there, my head is just sort of pinging with ideas. Yeah, that's exactly how the plants are behaving as well. Arriving, being nurtured, being liberated, and becoming themselves in their own environment. And you know, when I was writing the book on urban plants, I really examined my attitude towards non-native plants that don't come here, and it was a big journey for me, because as a sort of, I suppose, a traditional botanist and conservationist, we shun those plants. They're the incomers, the invasive species, the ones that don't belong here. You know, a journalist recently said, you know, I won't name him, but he's in the book. You know, send Buddleja back to China where it belongs. We don't need it here. And it's sort of like, no. Let's embrace it and love it for what it actually is. You know, this world is a world that we have created. It's a world of our own making. And I think, you know, the human element and the botanical, the plant element, living so closely alongside each other, we've really got to understand that, you know, strength comes from that diversity, of that mixing of cultures, of that recombinant ecology, of people coming together and really surviving together and finding new ways to live. You know, I think, you know, you've opened my eyes there, Jess, to the similarities there. That's amazing.
And likewise, you've opened my eyes as well to, I never quite thought about plant communities in that way and the parallels that we have. You know, that's amazing.
I can see why it's your spirit plant, Jess, really. Consciously or unconsciously, it feels to me like it really is your plant, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think this episode is really making me even have a deepened appreciation for the Buddleja, you know, learning more about how it arrived in the UK and how much is the Buddleja sort of establishing itself now, Trevor?
Yeah,
it seems to be everywhere when I'm on the train, you know.
I know. Somebody said British Rail should adopt it as their colour. Sort of Buddleja rail purple or something. It's still moving around. It's still spreading. So it moved around the rail network as well as from gardens as well. You know, a single plant. So the plant produces these tiny seeds with two little wings on it, and they're very, very airborne. So that's how they move around. A single plant they've estimated can produce 2.7 million seeds in a year. So it's producing a huge amount of seeds, and almost all of that seed will travel more than 10 meters away. People have studied this, which I love. You little sticky pads placed meters away from a plant to see how much seed falls on these little sticky pads. So it gets around a lot, and it's also being helped by climate change. So it's sort of It spread sort of gently for quite a few decades after the 20s and 30s, but it didn't really take off until the Second World War, on the Blitz in particular, and that the scars of the Blitz opened up habitat in not just in London but in Coventry, in Bristol, in, you know, many cities throughout Britain. open scars that allowed Buddleja to get a real foothold and a real place to live in because it likes to have a little bit of open habitat to germinate. It doesn't like competition. So that's why you'll often see seedlings growing on walls and pavements, because there isn't much else growing there. So it's an ideal sort of habitat for it. So it started spreading quite a lot after the war, so the 50s and the 60s. But then since the 80s, it's really taken off. It's really started spreading. So what we think is happening with climate change is that Buddleja is now flowering earlier in the year, setting its seed earlier in the year. So it's getting this combination of warmth and wet in the late summer and autumn before the winter. So the seeds are primed, ready to go in the spring to germinate. So it has spread a huge amount. I mean, it's in 70% of 10 kilometre squares that have been mapped in Britain, so it's everywhere, but it's still spreading north and west, so we can map it with the changing temperatures heading north and west. So it's in Edinburgh and Scotland, but heading further north and west into Ireland as well. So it hasn't finished its exploration with us in Britain. I'm not going to use the word invasion or invasiveness or anything like that. It's not that at all. It's a coming along beside us. It's a companion plant, which I think mirrors your spirit plant rather nicely, Jess.
Yes, I think there's quite a lot of parallels with the history of homelessness here, because the bomb site, the bomb sites were a really important part of homelessness history, and after the Second World War. We've got quite a lot of accounts in our archive here of people living, and they were called the derries. So for a couple of decades at least, people would live there and sleep there, and it was a site in the urban realm which homeless people really used as well. So that's another thing that's just made me think, wow, another thing that Buddleja and homeless people have in common, and making use of those city sites that others just don't go to.
We, of course, always learn how to grow the plant in the story, though I think we've established that Buddleja davidii will probably grow without our help. But there are other Buddlejas.
Yeah, this is what I love about the genus Buddleja, if you like. There's over 140 different species. A lot of them, they come from Asia, but also a real hot spot for them is sort of South America, Mexico, Central America. There's some really exciting species coming from all over the place, really. Mum, when we went to Longstock Garden Park, she bought a plant of Buddleja alternifolia, which is sometimes known as the fountain Buddleja. So our normal Buddleja has flowers at the ends of the stem. This one has little clusters of flowers all the way along the stem. So when it's in flower, the plant looks like a fountain of lilac blue, which is fabulous. There's another common one that you can buy, which is completely different from you look at it and you wouldn't believe it's a Buddleja. The leaf looks similar in shape, but this is Buddleja globosa, the orange ball tree. So this one has literally balls of orange flowers. It looks like it's covered in small oranges when it's in flowers. A little bit of honey scent. It's not very, very strongly scented, but a really easy plant to grow and a real sort of talking point in the garden. And then there are a couple of new ones which are becoming more widely available. There's one called Buddleja crispa, which has pale sort of almost felty grey woolly leaves to it, likes a nice wall to grow against. And then the largest flowered one, which I don't know why you don't see it more often. It used to be grown quite a lot, Buddleja colvellii, which has these great big sort of clusters of big flowers at the ends of the stem. But if you're an aficionado, you can really start getting into these plants, and this little chat has actually reawakened my interest in Buddleja, and I've been looking online for different species to grow. There's Farrerii and Lindeliana, and I've planted a plant called Buddleja cordata in the garden, which is from Mexico. Again, another one of these white-leaved things, white-leaf species, big clusters of white, honey scented flowers. So that's meant to grow like a tree. I'm not sure it'll grow into a tree here in northwest Wales, but I hope it will. Well, the one I'm really after is one called Buddleja speciosissima. And this was stocked by a couple of nurseries a few years ago. I'm trying to track down a plant. So if anybody knows of a plant, I'd love to get my hand on some seed or some material. And this is a beautiful thing, and it's hummingbird pollinated. So it has these enormous, think of a lipstick on the end of, we're talking 2 or 3, 4-inch bright red orange flowers hanging in clusters from the end of the stem, but it seems to be hardy in Britain. So let's grow these wonderful things. Let's try them. There's more to Buddleja than just davidii, but yeah, even if you're just growing davidii, as you say, who can fail to grow it, and who can fail to love it? It's such a fantastic plant.
Fabulous. There seems to be there are others we need to try, Jess, in the garden.
I've been making notes as Trevor's been speaking. I can feel a trip to a nursery coming on.
I think that would be fabulous. And just briefly, anything we need to know about it? Grows in sun? Any particular things we should know, Trevor? Or is it pretty much easy? It's the same as normal Buddleja.
Yeah, all of them the same. All of them like a sunny, well-drained position. So as long as you're not sticking your plant in wet soil, clay soil, and in deep shade, then you'll be okay. Give it sun. Think of a railway embankment or a wall, your pavement or a wall, and you'll be fine. Yeah, give them sun, give them well drained, and they'll grow easily. Yeah. And Jess, if you do plant some in the garden, try some of these other ones, and very, very best of luck with them. They're fabulous plants. I'm really glad you've named it as your spirit plant, because I just love that idea. It's a beautiful idea, and I'm glad it's such a special plant to you as well.
Thank you, Trevor, for all the inspiration. And if you're ever down this way, do come and visit the museum and our growing collection of Buddlejas.
Oh, I'd love to. That'd be fantastic. You're on. I'll come down to London and we'll have a look.
Awesome.
Many of our plant stories now come from listeners. So if you have a story you want to share with us, you can find the details of how to get in contact on the website or in the show notes. Our Plant Stories is an independent production, presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman, and supported by its listeners. If you would like to get each new episode of our Plant Stories directly in your inbox the day I publish it, then you can sign up to the newsletter on the website or in the show notes. The podcast is supported by its listeners, and you can join them with a small donation at Buy Me a Coffee. The link is on the website.